All right.
Top-notch introduction. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to The New Left. Today's topic is fascism, fact or fiction. My name is Logan Grendel and I will be hosting us today. And with us we have an excellent panel of some great people from the Populist Voice Network. And I'd like them each to introduce themselves, starting with, to my left, Amira.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amira. I'm a writer for a blog called Endemic Times that I started about 2 years ago. You can also find more of my work on YouTube under the same name, Endemic Times. And I'm very excited to get talking about what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Excellent. And right below her, Andrew.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew. Just your typical Putin stooge here. No. So I am here. You can find me on these panel shows. You can also find me with Postmortem Breakdown with Logan and Joy, and on Joy's channel. And I'm ready to get talking about a lot of things that have been going on right now. Uh,
Excellent. And to his right, Felice.
Hi, I'm Felice, and I'm a researcher at the Populist Voice. And you can find me on Twitter attempting to not get angry continually.
Good luck.
Yeah, it's not working out well, but I'm trying. Haven't been blocked yet. So that's about it, though.
All right, and next to you, Comrade K. You're muted.
you're muted, sir.
Damn it, that always happens. Hello, everyone. I'm Comrade K, but my name is Jason. I live in Southern Ontario, Canada. I am one of the only Canadians that this channel has had so far, but we're hoping to add more. So if there are any Canadians out there that'd like to join the ranks, please let me know. Like I said, I live in Southern Ontario. I'm very much familiar with American and Canadian politics, and it makes me want to scream continuously every morning as I wake up, but I can't do that because I'll choke while I brush my teeth. It's good to be here tonight.
Thank you. And last but absolutely not least, we have Ludin.
Hello, everybody. I am Ludin. You can find me on Twitter at Ludin Shazo, being a gremlin to the bread tube left. And you can also find me on multiple panels or our show, Professional Lapses, on PVN.
Excellent. And yes, you can find me here and on my own podcast, the Focused on Infinity podcast with Logan Grendel, unsurprisingly. And so today we want to talk to you about fascism, and not the kind of fascism that people use colloquially. And by that, I mean everyone uses the word fascism a lot. Everything that people don't like is somehow fascism. And I think it's because a lot of us haven't lived through some of the historical fascism that we, have heard about in past times. But what I see, and what a lot of us should see, is that variety, there has always been a strain of it running through our country, right? America is, in my own words, the machinery of America is inherently fascist. It's just not always governed by people who have fascist aspirations. And one of the most effective things about how America is run is that the people who run America have bought into the lie that America is a democratic country. I think a lot of them genuinely believe that, so they don't see that they're operating a death machine. And then you have the ones that know and are lying about it, but that's a different story. Now, what I want to start by doing is defining our terms, because I think we should make a habit of doing this whenever we're having important conversations, because words mean a lot of things, right? Words have meanings and they mean a lot of things, but if you're talking to someone, you want to be sure you're having the same conversation, right? You want to be sure that the word that you're using means the same thing to the other person. And there's lots of shorthand, there are lots of ways that people identify and things that people throw out there without knowing what they're talking about. So what I want to do is put up, now this is from the Holocaust Museum. And I would like to think they know a little bit about what fascism is, so I take their definition pretty seriously. And here it is. Now, we have powerful and continuing nationalism, disdain for human rights, identification of enemies as a unifying cause, supremacy of the military, rampant sexism, controlled mass media, obsession with national security, religion and government intertwined, corporate power protected, and I would say also intertwined with government, labor power suppressed, disdain for intellectuals and the arts, obsession with crime and punishment, rampant cronyism and corruption, and fraudulent elections. Now, I'm going to leave that up there for a second so that you can look at it and think about how basically that's the DNA of America. All of that. There's not a thing there that is not foundational to the creation of this country. And there is not a thing there that isn't built into how our country operates, here and abroad, right? The other thing that we've added over this is a veneer of democracy, a veneer of being a free country. And that is part of, the control of the mass media. And part of the way that we are controlled is with the big American lie, that America is benevolent, that America is a source of freedom, rather than the world's greatest purveyor of violence and destruction. Now, I am saying that America is already a fascist country, but what I'm also saying is that it's taking a turn for the worst, and fast. And a lot of people have checked out since we got a Democrat in office. They were saying it last year. Not last year, sorry. They were saying it last presidency. And I think they were partially right. And then you have people on the other side who are like, that's ludicrous. 45 wasn't doing fascist things. And let me say this. Every single president this country's ever had can be said to be fascist. If you are operating a fascist machine, that's part of the definition, right? So we have to be serious in the way that we think about this, because we can't go to the team game of things and also to the knee-jerk reaction, right? That anything a liberal says is stupid. Oh, a liberal said that Trump is doing fascist things, so it must not be true, right? Or a Republican says Biden's doing a fascist thing, so it must not be true, right? We have to look at reality. And that's where we're going to start. And I want to just give everyone a chance to weigh in on the base outline of what we are, of what we're dealing with here, before we move on to specific topics about what's happening today and what I think will be happening going forward. Anyone want to step in?
Sure, I can step in. I mean, I think a lot of what happened when it came to Trump is that a lot of liberals suddenly woke up to the fact that there's racism in this country, right? However, due to the mass-controlled media that was shown as one of the third one there, it kept them right from actually looking at the whole historical context, right? And instead, it did a very effective job of isolating Trump. Trump is the exception, doesn't represent any trend or any sort of generational habits that have been happening throughout this country, right? He's a lone racist. We messed up and elected him. If we want to get rid of all the ideology behind him, we just got to get rid of him, and that's it. And then we can go back to what we were doing, which was nothing, right? And you see this all the time when liberals have memes. I saw a meme today, actually, on Facebook where they were saying Happy President's Day. And then they had all the presidents lined up, except they did a Sharpie through Trump, right? And it's like, you realize that over half of those other presidents on there were more racist and more sexist than Trump, right? We have a lot of slave owners that were on that list, right? We had a lot of presidents who believed that women shouldn't be able to vote, right? Presidents that supported eugenics, right? And so failure to look at the history, right, that got us to the point right there, we have a long way to go to even undo any of this, right? If we're going to look at it in a very superficial way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone else?
I just wanted to say that when you were saying that democracy is what we think we have here, because that's not what we've ever supposed to have here, like ever. James Madison, when he was going over what we needed here when they were making the Declaration of Independence and the new Constitution, in the 10th Federalist paper, he actually talked about why they were going to set up everything the way they wanted to, and that was because they were afraid of tyranny of the majority, which made it so people who were lower class could not rise up and take over the ruling class. And that's actually why we have the Congress, and then we have the executive branch and the judicial branch. It's so that the little people can't rise up. And it was never supposed to be a democracy. It was always just supposed to be this complete sham that we could, digest, hopefully, and they still be able to do what they were doing at the time. So, even at the creation of this country, like you were saying, there was never supposed to be a democracy.
Yeah, that's real. That's real. Comrade K?
Fascism, to me, is the result of not only the dying breath of capitalism, but fascism is also very much the result of not maintaining your society and making sure that people are prepared to fight for the freedoms and rights that they take for granted. Even though America has deeply fascistic tendencies, most Americans will say that they love the United States of America because, in comparison to other nations, they get to enjoy the finer things, like eating food that they wouldn't be able to eat in other countries, or enjoying a certain kind of music or a certain kind of art medium, or, going out and having drinks and stuff like that. The things that the American dream likes to promote, Fascism is the antithesis to all the things that Americans claim that America is, and yet it's so ingrained into American civilization and the foundation of American society. And if you ask the majority of Black and brown people, of LGBTQ people, of immigrants, they could confirm this. They could say, look, we see past all of this. And it's truly scary when they are written off as simply being crazy or people who overreact, because I remember that used to be, like, when I was in high school, that used to be a very big and prevalent thing. When people of color and women and other minorities started becoming more outspoken, I remember so many people shitting on them for making any comparisons between fascist regimes and the US government or any European governments, and laughing at them because they're like, oh, this little thing that you're referencing here is nothing compared to what happened in Auschwitz and all that kind of stuff. But I want to quickly say, it's sometimes those comparisons have to be made, because that is the end result of what happens when you ignore the signs.
Absolutely, well said. And I will back that up by saying that I am from New York. I live in New York City. It's supposed to be the most liberal, cosmopolitan place, right? But if you lived in New York City under Giuliani or Bloomberg, especially during stop and frisk, at any moment you could be stopped by heavily armed and highly bellicose motherfuckers who would basically ask you to give account for yourself and show them your papers, right? Millions of stops, millions of arrests, right? This is how it was for people of color. You are absolutely right. Would you like to weigh in, Ludin?
Yeah, sorry. I have the little gremlins running around in the background, so it's kind of weird. But yeah, as a New Yorker myself, I have also been a victim of stop and frisk a handful of times, and I can say it's not fun. But yeah, this country is really backwards. Like, they most people profess, oh, we're not racist. We're like the paragon of virtue. We send freedom elsewhere. But if you really pay attention, you have an overbloated military. You have racist police that are the descendants of the slave catching system. You have book burnings. That's also fascist. So it's like, come on now. Like, you're preaching to people trying to make yourself look good, but you're rotten on the core.
Yeah. That is very true. And now, before we go on to the next thing, I just want to say this as something to keep in mind, right? One of the big differences with how America works, the difference is not the machine itself. Differences between norms and forms, right? The norms of America are democratic. The things that are okay to say out loud, especially for leaders, right? Those are the norms. So even as Ronald Reagan, say, was tearing the guts out of the labor movement and letting the LGBTQ community die of AIDS, right? Even as he was doing those things, he wasn't saying, let's kill off these people, right? Because the norms of America were such that you were not supposed to say those things out loud. He was changing the forms, but not the norms, right? Now, then you get to, and that continued to happen after the Reagan Revolution through many, many presidents. And the reason that Trump rankled so much was because he presented a change to the norms. The forms remained largely unchanged. And that's the thing. Like, Trump did not make certain things much worse. He did not advance fascism in terms of forms, which is why some people say he was not a big deal. But norms are also very important because norms embolden people. Norms show you, especially coming from the loudest people, what is okay for a country to say in public. What does the country stand for, right? Because figureheads, as much as we wish it were not true, figureheads matter. What you're hearing every day on the news, that matters. I wish it weren't that way, but it does. Especially when you have a fever swamp of people who are waiting for a chance to make these things overt again. So let's go to one of the first things we want to talk about in terms of how fascism is on the rise and already present here. And it's something that I think that ties into what Luden was saying earlier and to what I was saying in terms of New York City. It's the recent story from New Jersey. And I think Andrew's going to bring that one to us.
Give me 1 second. So, content warning, police brutality. I think it is good to just show this video just because I think it is good to see before our eyes kind of how this whole thing fanned out. So hopefully the audio works on this. But give me 1 second.
If you're a black person, you don't need to watch. We've seen enough.
Oh my goodness.
Gigs where I can say what I want. That's not
Please
how the business
wait
works.
for the
So let's
advertisement
change
for
the
Amazon
business.
Prime.
Of course. Capitalism.
Yeah.
They only have like 2 good shows on there.
Accusations of racial bias by police after they broke up a fight between a pair of teenagers, one black, one white, at a New Jersey mall. A now viral video shows the teens having a heated discussion. The white teen pointing his finger in the face of the black teen, who pushes the white teen's hand away. The white teen then shoves the black teen, and the two begin to tussle. At one point, the white teen tackling the black teen and pinning him to a couch, then throwing him to the ground. When police arrive to break up the fight, a female officer pulls the white teen away and pushes him to the couch without handcuffs, while the other officer presses the black teen to the ground and kneels on his back. The female officer also coming over to kneel on the teen's upper back while they place him, and only him, in handcuffs.
Oh no! Holy
Treatment some viewed as unequal, unfair, and racially biased. One bystander exclaiming in surprise as police handcuffed the black teen.
Yo, it's because he's black.
CNN affiliate WCBS spoke with one of the teens involved, 14-year-old Kai, who asked that his last name not be used.
I was confused, why they saw me as a bad person, me as a aggressor.
The 8th grader telling CNN affiliate WABC the fight began after he stood up for a friend, a 7th grader, being picked on by the other teen, who the station identifies as a high school student. The teen calling the encounter with police scary and frustrating.
If they don't know how to treat the situation and deal with the situation equally and fairly, then they shouldn't be able to deal with the situation at all.
New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy saying,
I'm deeply disturbed by what appears to be a racially disparate treatment in the video. We are underscore with emphasis that we're committed to increasing the trust between law enforcement on the one hand and the communities they serve on the other.
The NAACP New Jersey State Conference calling for the officers involved to be removed from the force pending an investigation, and saying despite years of talk about bias training and accountability, when Bridgewater police found 2 youths fighting, the immediate reaction was to aggressively throw the black child to the ground. At the same time, the white youth was carefully eased onto a couch and treated like a victim.
It's very obvious.
Kai's mother, Ebony, telling WCBS,
Maybe they could have broken up the fight and maybe set them aside and called their parents. No cuffs, no aggression. Dealt with them like they were teenagers.
asked what they want to see happen to the officers.
I guess for them to be fired.
I'm not happy about it. And I do want those 2 cops to become unemployable. That's what I would like.
The Bridgewater Township Police Department saying in a Facebook post, it knows the video of the incident has upset members of the community and is asking county prosecutors to conduct an internal affairs investigation. The Somerset County Prosecutor's Office Internal Affairs Unit says it is investigating the fight itself and the police response to it.
Oh, no.
All right. I think we all...
Yeah.
So I have a comment about this, if that's okay, if I just kind of jump in.
Yeah, jump
here.
right in. Please do.
So the individual that was going after these 2 kids, he was actually a junior in high school. And I found that it was really interesting that all they tried to say was he was in high school, trying to disassociate the fact that he initially was becoming aggressive to a 7th grader. So this is someone that's around the age of maybe 11, 12, or 13. Really kind of depends on when you started school. The 8th grader, I'm totally going to butcher his name, and I know we just heard it. He's 14 years old, and he's an 8th grader who's getting harassed and then hurt by a junior in high school. So that's someone who's at the very least 16, if not 17 or 18 years old. That to me, just that age divide is why the hell is this kid trying to be aggressive to junior high students and probably a freshman in high school? And yet the cops are being aggressive to, of course, the black kid and putting him on the ground. It's just infuriating.
Yeah. Real quick, it even says in the article, Kai said the fight started when the other teen was bullying his friend. And Kai intervened. Yeah. So.
And that kid was the 7th grader. So it's just to have that age disparity, the physical disparity is shame on these cops for doing that, because they should have assessed the situation much calmer and much easier than how they did.
It's pretty stark, but also, as Ludin said earlier, this ain't nothing new. You ain't telling us shit. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. That is exactly the problem, is that is how you have to live in this country if you are black and if you are mask presenting, right? That's how you have to live. Even if you're femme presenting, you've seen tons of stories of police roughing up. Like there was that one girl, she was like 15 or 16 at a pool party, and the cop did that like rolling, diving tackle like he was in a video game. Right? And this is normal. This is how we live, right? So to say that America is not fascist is lunacy to most of us. But I want to just quickly, to back all this up, read one phrase from this article from Alternet, which is quite difficult to see, isn't it? But at any rate, it says, however this dark chapter in American history concludes, and whatever next chapter may hold, there will be many Americans, largely white people in the privileged classes, who will exclaim in all sincerity, how could such a thing have happened? Are we not better than this? And the answer is no. Yeah, it's a very clear no. Would anyone else like to comment on this case? Comrade K, please.
I don't know if this was intentional of them or not, but they kind of just screwed themselves a bit because the media network there that was doing the broadcast, I can't remember which one it was. They all
CNN.
This
They're
was
all the
CNN.
same.
Of course, it was CNN. They read a part of the statement which was like, after all the talk of sensitivity training and racial bias training and all this kind of stuff, this is the end result, just the same old thing. And I'm like, did you just inadvertently kill the argument of reform that you mainstream media outlets like to perpetuate all the time? They literally just did, because they just admitted that it doesn't work. Like, those cops, when they showed up there, you would think this kind of a situation, two teenagers fighting, even if you don't know the context at all, one of them is a bully piece of shit and the other one isn't, he's trying to defend his friend. Even if, like, you have no idea what the context is, two people fighting, you break them up and you stop it. That should, that there's nothing like, it's not a drug raid. It's not like anything like that. It's two teenagers breaking up. And yet, the simplest thing in the world would be to break them up and be like, all right, boys, what's going on? Nope, it's time to go all Hitman absolution on the one black kid and leave the white kid on the couch as if he's done nothing wrong. And I couldn't help but be reminded of that one time where there was a black security guard that was apprehending a very violent person outside of, I think it was a nightclub. I don't know if anybody else remembers this. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I believe the police either shot or arrested the black security guard. Yeah, for being violent, even though
they shot and killed him while he was doing his job.
Yep.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, I knew I was thinking of that. It just has the exact same vibes. If they're black, just throw them to the ground. And yeah, this is nothing new. White people will keep going on and on saying, aren't we better than this? But like Logan said, the answer is no. And we need to accept that so that we can face the ugly truths of our nations and forcibly correct them.
Luden, would you like to speak on this one? I would love to hear what you have to say as someone who has experienced it directly.
Yes. So my thing is, because this is actually the first time I actually saw the video of the fight. So anybody with eyes can see that the black kid was losing the fight. Like, he was getting tossed around and everything. So how, as a police officer, do you think you, are doing the right thing by assaulting the person who's losing the fight and treating them like they're the aggressor?
Yeah, exactly. That's it. I mean, and we all know why, right? Because it's one of those rhetorical questions that has a very, very easy answer that we all know. But some of us refuse to see because we don't want to believe that we live in the country that we do and that we always have. We put this one first because this is foundational. This is America. Slave patrols led to modern policing. And it's all about the control of, first of all, the control of capital, the protection of capital. But what was this country's first primary source of capital? Black bodies. That's it. Right? And it's important for people to be able to say, this is why when we say that we need to unify, you can't leave people behind in unifying. Unifying doesn't mean, well, let's not talk about race. No, unifying means we need to appreciate the struggles of certain people and recognize the reality that they face. This is every day, all day for people of color. And even in New York, it's terrible, but it's worse in some places where the cops are much friendlier with certain three-letter organizations that we know about, right? LA, they've got the executioner gang, right? They've got gangs of cops that can't get into the gang until they have a body on their name. So this is, and the other thing about this is that the reason it is system-wide, right, is because police departments, they're connected basically by their roots, but individually, you can't get rid of all police stations and all police precincts because they're individual. Every city's union is a different organization. So when we say that we are occupied essentially by police and by policing, it's true. They are not accountable to us. We can't vote police out, right? We can't say, okay, we don't want police anymore because they get most of the funding of every major city, just like the military gets most of the funding from our discretionary spending. It's an exact echo. And going back to that list that we put in defining our terms of fascism, right? Reliance on the military, obeisance to the military, over focus on military might, because what is it? It's might makes right, right? That's what we're dealing with. So that's something that's always been in America. Does anyone want to weigh in before we move on? Please, Andrew.
I just want to reread Phil Murphy's statement here because I think this really speaks volumes of what he said. Although an investigation is still gathering the facts about this incident, I'm deeply disturbed by what appears to be racially disparate treatment in this video. We're committed to increasing trust between law enforcement and the people they serve. That statement to me screams the Democratic version of thoughts and prayers, right?
Mm-hmm.
That to me shows we are a party that has decided to be on the team of the cops, also increase their funding, also increase, funding when it comes to military weaponry to our cops. And so we'll give you nice words, but we have no plans because Eric Adams, a cop, is the mayor of New York. And Joe Biden has a career of being allies with the cops. Mm-hmm. And so I think that just to me really stood out a lot.
Absolutely. Comrade Cage, you want to say something?
Yes. I want to re-emphasize quickly what Logan said. I hear a lot of white people always talking like, oh, the way to unite Americans is to not talk about race. Why do we have to make everything about race? But that is erasure. That is erasing the struggles of people of color and indigenous people in the United States. It's the same thing in Canada. Please do not say that, especially when the majority of white people have a track record of they don't want to talk about race and politics until a statue of some white colonizer they barely even learned about in school is about to come down. And then they're screaming, oh, you're erasing history. What do you think you're doing whenever you say, oh, let's not talk about race and stuff like that? That statue of that guy, there'll always be a dozen textbooks with his name in it, and not a single kid will leave school having learned about him to the point where they feel like vomiting because they've heard his name 1,000 times. The struggles of Black people and indigenous people and people of color in general cannot go unheard if you truly want to bring Americans together. Recognize the threats that are in front of you. The threat here is systemic racism.
And obviously a lot of those statues went up after the Civil War to intimidate people. That was actually historical erasure. And
60s.
Also, yes, some of them as late as the 60s. It's true. I mean, some of them were like in the early 1900s. There was like a different waves of when they went up, but absolutely. And also, we're not the ones that made everything about race. We didn't invent the concept of whiteness and blackness. That was y'all, so that you could enslave us and call us less than, right? So, let's make, Ludin, do you want to add in?
Yeah, one little thing. So something has occurred to me. So everybody's aware of the new movie Encanto and how there's a song called We Don't Talk About Bruno?
I am not.
Well, it's a very popular song. It's really catchy, but it just occurred to me, what if blackness was the Bruno that everybody doesn't want to talk about?
That's a good point.
Watch the movie.
I will. I have no frame of reference on this one, so this is all y'all. Let's go to so now we've kind of got a baseline for American fascism and the fact that essentially we are always under, force. We're under might. And next.
All right, so this is regarding Portland shooting. So let's just read. 1 dead, 5 hurt following confrontation between armed neighbor and protesters in Rose City Park neighborhood. Okay, let's just read the context. 6 people were shot, 1 fatally, in a mass shooting incident in Northeast Portland Saturday night. Portland police said on Sunday the incident began as a confrontation between an armed neighbor and armed protesters. According to a press release from the Portland Police Bureau, PPB. Wow. Police were dispatched after 8 p.m. to the intersection of Northeast 50 Avenue and Northeast Hasselhoff Street in the Rose City Park neighborhood, next to Normandale Park. Dispatch records showed 23 police units and 4 fire and medical units at the scene by 9 p.m. One female victim was found dead when officers arrived. Friends later confirmed with KGW that her name is June Knightley. Her cause of death will be determined by the Oregon State Medical Examiner, police said. 5 additional people were hit by gunfire, including the shooter, police said. A woman who was among the injured told the New York Times that a neighbor fired at a group of people who were rerouting traffic ahead of the planned march. She said that the neighbor swore at them and called them violent terrorists. She said a demonstrator returned fire. 2 men and 3 women were taken to the hospital for treatment. Their status is unknown, according to police late Saturday night. 2 people were taken into custody at the site of the shooting, PBB said, but police haven't released any further suspect information. Homicide detectives are investigating the case. PBB said the scene was extremely chaotic and a number of people left the scene without talking to police. They believe that a large number of people witnessed what happened. And so,
yeah. Okay. So just to give a little bit of context as to why that's so, I mean, we'll talk about the framing of that article also, because absolute garbage and just, you know, another way they control our minds, controlled mass media. This basically ties in both controlled mass media and also the other thing that fascism requires, which is a citizenry or a group of the citizenry that is let off the leash to do whatever they want to advance its goals, right? This was not like, you know, a dispute between and the fact that they said homeowner, like, okay, he owned a house. What does that have to do with anything? They weren't at his house, right? He came to a Black Lives Matter march for Amir Locke, a person killed by police in his bed and shot people. And going back to what I said earlier, right? Norms and forms. Now, the forms were already there, right? But previous president, the Marxists, the anarchists, and all that stuff, all those people that he listed to go after, this person was saying what he said and going after the people who he said to go after. Now, did he want to do it anyway? Is it part of America to go after those people anyway, to destroy any sort of leftism, to destroy any sort of labor power, any sort of people-powered action? Absolutely it is. But the norms changed a little bit. And there was an increase in violence like this. Anyone who wants to jump in, please do.
I guess I'll go. I want to read. So Mayor Ted Wheeler. This is what Mayor Ted Wheeler had to say about this, right? And I think this is really important. While many of the details of last night's shooting near Normandale Park are unclear, we do know one thing for sure. Our community is dealing with the sadness of another senseless act of gun violence. Okay, so this is what Democrats do, right? And this is where I have strong criticism of anti-gun activists, right? They want to try and make sure that the problem is only to the gun, right? The problem is not gun violence here. The problem is not that we have lack of gun control. The problem is that we have white supremacy. Mm-hmm. That is the problem. And that is something this mayor, and this is something that a lot of milquetoast Democrats will not talk about, because they just want you to think that all these problems, all this violence would go away if we just made guns harder to access, right? Yeah. I don't know about you. Drugs have been illegal for a long ass time, and we still have people who can get a hold of drugs if they want to, right? That's the same thing that's going to be happening if we completely just make it so that hard for people to get guns legally. You know, you'll build more of an underground thing with that. And so that is something that, you know, and it's such an easy thing for Democrats to do, because it's the one area, the NRA is the one area where Democrats are not bought. So that's the one thing they can take a stand against.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to call that out.
Absolutely. And that actually makes them complicit, because they're asking for the state to have a monopoly on violence, because they're not asking for the police to also be disarmed. They're asking just for the people to be disarmed. And fuck all that, because the thing that stopped this shooting from being worse, this is a case that the NRA should be standing up for 100%. Because what happened in this case? It's the story that liberals say never happens. What stopped a bad guy with a gun, in this case, actually was a good guy with a gun. That's just the truth. That is not, we're not making anything up. That's not hyperbole. That's not rhetoric. That's what happened. He would have shot more people and killed them had someone who was with the Black Lives Matter protesters not returned fire. So, please, Comrade K.
Yeah, absolutely. The problem with American gun violence is a lot of people who talk about gun violence in America will complain so much that ever since the Columbine shooting and all the shootings that have come afterwards, especially the one in Christchurch, that one was particularly nightmarish. They'll complain nothing is ever done because it's always politicized, with the Democrats saying we need less guns and more gun control, and the Republicans are like, no, leave guns alone. And they don't understand that it goes much deeper than that. Russia has very loose gun laws. Now, Russia still has crime and gun violence and whatnot, but not nearly at the same level as America, because their country, even though it wasn't necessarily built on the greatest of things, wasn't built on a foundation of systemic racism and white supremacy and all the kind of things that America is built on. You can trust somebody in Russia to just not shoot up a school, but you can't trust the average weird-looking white kid that's sitting in the back of the cafeteria in high school. And if anything here, you're going to see pro-gun people start shitting on the one guy in the Black Lives Matter march that had the gun, because armed minorities are harder to oppress. My country, Canada, we boast about having tight gun control and tight gun laws and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is we only have low levels of gun violence because we have a low population. And our gun laws used to be so much looser before the Oka crisis happened, where the government was willing to sic the Canadian Army on First Nations people, Native people, defending their land from corporate encroachment. And then conveniently, right after that, we started seeing, AK-47s get banned and certain assault rifles getting banned to the point where we are today. We have to address systemic racism and the causes of mass shootings rather than the guns themselves.
Absolutely. I want to bring in Amira.
So one of the things that was coming up as we've been talking about this is two things for me. The fact that this was a protest that was for Amir Locke, an individual who was shot while he was sleeping and who had a gun because he wanted to be able to protect himself. Now, not necessarily in this same situation, but it's a similar dynamic of a minority arming themselves in order to protect themselves because they know that this system is broken and it's not going to protect them whatsoever. And then the other side of it too is that this individual who did the shooting at this protest, talking about him as a homeowner and putting more of an emphasis on that and more of an importance on he wants to have quiet sanctity in his home and doesn't want to have to listen and deal with protesters or the traffic that creates. It's emboldening everyone else who's a homeowner. And we know that people that are homeowners are predominantly of the white upper middle class that have also inherited that wealth from their white upper middle class families that have given that to them. So it's this really dangerous dynamic that we're having, I think, of when we talk about gun rights, who should own guns, and then how they're essentially used. Because had it not been for this one protester in this group that had that gun on him, who knows what else would have happened.
Absolutely. I want to make sure we get full complement of femme representation. Felice, if you want to say anything, I can't see you, so just want to make sure you get a chance to weigh in.
I wanted to actually talk about the victim real quick, June Knightley. I've looked up a lot about her recently now, and she was 60. She had just beat cancer. She was a big advocate and leader in the LGBTQ plus community in Portland. And she was fighting against fascism. That's what she died doing. And she had just been able to get back out and start protesting again. And her community is in terrible mourning over her loss. And I just wanted to make sure we had a second to talk about her because she was an amazing woman.
She really was, and everyone spoke so highly of her. And like, rest in power to her, because she was there for to stand up for human rights. That's really what it's all about. These people were there to stand up for human rights. You can even, and as much as I don't like that we have to play these games, sometimes instead of saying Black Lives Matter when you're talking to people who are not, who have some fucked up ideas, is to say human rights instead, because that's what we're talking about when we say Black Lives Matter, right? And not the organization. The organization, we're not here to talk about that today, but the idea, right? The idea. It's human rights. That's what we're here for. And again, norms and forms, right? The biggest thing that happened after the civil rights movement was that the norms of America changed heavily. Because before the civil rights movement, like in the early 50s, the late 40s, it was normal, especially in some places in the country, for if a black person's walking down the street and white people are walking in their direction, it was still normal for the black person to have to step off the sidewalk and avert their eyes. That was the norm. That was the norm. The norms changed. The forms remained the same, right? So it's the same thing with there's a change in the norms. And so that means that you can't just go out, the person couldn't come out of his home and say, I'm not here for these black people, or these N-word lovers, right? He couldn't say that. It's not cool to say that anymore. So what you got to say is, I don't like the noise, right? These people are messing up my quiet community. And you have the press that backs him up in doing that. The press that uses the word homeowner, right? It's so twisted that they're saying something that's technically true, but it's irrelevant. But it's irrelevant in a way that shapes your mind subtly, especially if you're not paying attention. And look, I don't blame anyone for not fully paying attention. We got lots of shit to do. We're dealing with pandemics and with, the collapse of the economy and impending climate crisis. Who's got time besides people like us to spend all day, reading and staying up on every piece of the news? That's why I say independent news or nothing. And also just throwing out there that there is a great book called The Hidden History of the Second Amendment by Tom Hartman, which talks about how the Second Amendment is explicitly and definitively racist. There's no question about that. I want all of us to address a couple of things that have been happening in the comments that I cannot let go unmentioned. Barbaric behavior and slavery was a human trait long ago. Most places on Earth had slaves. Actually, Africa had enslaved their own even more. Does someone else want to say this before my blood pressure goes up? Comrade K, please.
All right. So let's disregard the Africa enslaved their people even more. I'd like to see whatever screwed up evidence she has to support that, but that's besides the point. A lot of people like to bring this up. This was in a PragerU video, actually, where instead of trying to argue that American slavery wasn't that bad because they know that's an argument they can't win, they just recited other past civilizations that were great for having slaves, right? Whether it be ancient Greece or Alexandrians or Egypt or Africa, Europe, whatever. It's like everyone did slavery at some point. We're not that bad for having done it. Here's the thing. I don't care what the hell happened between African tribes to have some of them sell their people to white slavers and some of them not. I don't care what kind of feuds they had, because at the end of the day, no one deserves to be enslaved. Yes, the African people on those shores, some of them were at odds with one another, and some of them may have given other tribe members to white slavers, but that doesn't excuse the white slavers for coming to those shores and enslaving them in the first place.
Yeah, and that's not even the most important part of this, but you're right. But let's go to Andrew.
Yeah, so I think one thing to consider is that slavery also in Africa meant slightly different. It was a different structure. And I'm not saying it was good, but it was a much different structure. Let's talk about how a lot of the slaves in Africa, it was actually more towards indentured servitude. It was more of they would work for free, not great, for a few years, and then they would be freed, right? Oftentimes they were with their families. Their families would serve, right? And so here they get to keep their identity. They get to keep their culture. They get to keep their nationality, right? And then let's take a look at the American way of how America did it, okay? Ship them into ships, right? It's like sardines packed amongst each other. Many of them died, not even necessarily, they didn't even get a proper burial. They were thrown in the water. Many of those bodies still exist in the water today, have not been found. When they were brought to America, they were separated from their families, taken away their names, taken away any sort of culture. You have a complete genocide of their culture, right? So to compare what they did in Africa to compare to what they did in America, completely separate things. And you're completely missing the actual structure of slavery in America if you're going to say that it is anything similar to what they were doing in Africa.
Absolutely. And you made another comment. Oops, not that one, which is also true and hilarious. But you said America did worse than other countries at the time. And let me just say this as clearly and as calmly as I can. American chattel slavery was an upgrade to the institution of slavery. Period. That is historical fact. Slavery before was not hereditary, right? What would happen before in civilizations throughout the world is that you would have a war with the next tribe over. They would be enslaved. Then they would become part of your tribe. Their children were not slaves. Okay? The concept of blackness was an invention in order to make it look like black people were a different class and a lower class of human, barely human. Okay? That is unique to America. And the fact is, I don't know if you're saying this in good faith or not. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt here. But in America, the legacy of anti-blackness is such that technically, by law, it is very easy to maintain black people in slavery. The 13th Amendment did not make slavery illegal in this country. America is still a slaveholding country. Okay? America is a slaveholding country, and that is another thing that leads back to the entire idea. This is a fascist country because we have slaves. We still have slaves. Anyone in prison is, by law, by definition, go look at the 13th Amendment. They are a slave. And anything you want to can be done with it. And look, how do you get someone into slavery? Slave catchers. You get cops, you get them in the pen, you get them on the books, you have a new slave. Most of the things that are made in America now, since we shipped all the factories elsewhere, they're made in prisons. Firefighters, fighting wildfires, prisoners who cannot become firefighters thereafter. Okay, so if you want to say that America is not unique in its evil, you are misinformed at best, disingenuous in the middle, and a white supremacist at worst. I said it and I meant it. Let's move on to the Don't Say Gay bill, which is another fantastic bit of how fascism is asserting itself in our country as we speak. I'm going to bring this up right now.
And I think too, Kate, it's just good to, Hitler got a lot of his ideas from America. Look that up, right? How America treated black people. Some of them were actually too harsh for Hitler and the Nazis. So that's another thing. I think that's just worth doing research. If you are in good faith, you would be surprised at some of the things you have found there. And then I think it'd be interesting for you to come back and to think if America is unique in that way or not.
And I appreciate you saying that. I came in hot because I hear this a lot on the internet from people who do not say it in good faith. So thank you. Thank you for that. So the next thing that is happening is the demonization of people who are not cis and, heterosexual. And that is all part of the maintenance of the fascistic notion of family that is in our country. And Florida is, as Florida tends to be, at the vanguard of making things worse fast. I'm going to read from this CBS News article. Florida is continuing to advance a pair of controversial bills that would bar school districts from encouraging classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity. The state's Senate and House have proposed the parental rights in education bills, commonly referred to as the Don't Say Gay bills by critics, which would apply to such topics in primary grade levels, as well as in cases where the discussions are deemed not age appropriate. The bills would extend to student support services, including counseling, and would require school district personnel to give parents all information related to a student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being, unless it's believed that such disclosure would result in abuse. Parents would be able to sue districts that do not follow these requirements. The purpose, according to the text, is to reinforce the fundamental right of parents to make decisions regarding the upbringing and control of their children. And would someone like to be the first to weigh in on this? Comrade K.
This story absolutely enrages me as a bisexual person myself. And I've been meaning to quickly say something about this for a long time now. I just never found time to do it because it's been so sad. The kind of people who are advancing this "Don't Say Gay" bill are the same kind of people that like to express how great America is. Oh, it's the land of the free. We get to do whatever we want over here. Anybody could be whoever they want. And, it's all about freedom and equal rights for everybody. But if you want to discuss the history of a certain group of people, nah, man, you want to like talk about the real bad side of white American colonizers and what they've done to this country. We're not going to let you do that. But we're not going to let you discuss the history of the people that they victimized either. And this is particularly disgusting because these are the kind of people that want to keep sexuality and discussions of sexuality out of school because they believe that the presence of queer people suggests sex, that it suggests perversion, that it suggests all this stuff because it's like, oh, why kids are so young. They always say this, kids are too young to know if they're gay or lesbian or anything like that. It's not about sex. When you were a kid, I'm assuming I'm talking to a cis straight person here. When you were a kid in kindergarten, you would have like 19 different people who you'd be like, I like you. I like you. I like you. You never knew that you were straight. You just knew who you were attracted to. And then later on into your life, those feelings start to develop. It's no difference with queer kids or gay kids or transgender kids or anything like that. The fact that straight people are the people who have been sexualizing queer people to the point where it's absurd. If you look at a couple of queer kids holding hands and your mind automatically goes to gay sex, you're the one who's fucked up and perverted, not them. This comes from the fascistic view that Logan said that American white cis families have of queer people. It's, they're just a bunch of perverts that want to turn all the kids gay. No, they want to let the kids know that it's okay to be these things and it's okay to have these feelings and to not be scared and to know the history behind that. Shame on anybody who is supporting this bill and trying to erase queer Americans from the history books and just
exactly. And it's going to kill people. There's already such a high number of children who kill themselves every single year because of this. I'm also bisexual, and if it weren't for counselors at my school, I don't know what would have happened. And this also makes it impossible for you to talk about that with counselors. This makes it impossible for you to talk about your sexuality at all without it being seen as something obscene in a school in Florida. This is literally going to kill children. Sometimes school is the only place you can go to be able to talk to your friends about this kind of stuff openly so you can actually find out what you're thinking and get out all these negative emotions. And the kids are going through enough, especially when you think about the fact their home lives. They could easily be kicked out for just wanting to love someone. And it's disgusting. And this is just perpetuating that in our government. That is the worst possible thing you could do to children. And they already have enough wrong to deal with at this point in this country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone else?
So as I was looking into this, I was really trying to understand where people that do support this are coming from, because I think that that's important when we have these kinds of discussions, because it's what is the other side of this take? What are they trying to do here? And this is coming from, I am a straight woman, so I mean that this is just my perspective, and I know I'm probably going to step on some toes here, and I don't mean to, but I think what some people from the other side of this argument are doing here, I think some are in good faith and some are in very, very bad faith. I think a lot of people are in bad faith when it comes to this. I think that some parents are just wanting to make sure that their kids are getting a good education that doesn't have sexuality involved in that. Because in this specific bill in Florida, it's specifically looking at classroom instruction from kindergarten through third grade. So for people that are saying, I don't want my kindergartner or my kid in third grade to have to be even having these conversations, a part of me somewhat understands that because it is a very young, impressionable age. And so I'm really not trying to step on toes here. I'm really trying to understand kind of the different views on this.
It is absolutely important to do that. And were you done?
I just had one other.
Oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
One other part. I think that people are paying too much attention to some of these ideological political fights that are going on at the very top of the like upper echelon of like liberalism that's happening. And I think this is their reaction to it. This is a very reactionary kind of bill. It's from a very much of a place of conservative, somewhat white supremacy aspects. They do not want to have these conversations. And I think the goal here should be, instead of implementing policies like this, we should be implementing having proper education, proper food and health standards when it comes to when your kids go to school, that they have the proper types of teachers that are not taking advantage of them. Because let's face it, kids are also experiencing bullying and rape and sexual harassment when they are at school. School is not always a safe place for people. It can sometimes be worse to go to school than to stay at home. So that was just kind of what was going on in my head as I was looking at this, because I understand where people are coming from if they're a parent and they just want their kid to get a good education, but this isn't how you go about it. And you should be asking your legislators, your congressmen, your mayors to let's advance what we teach our children and give them healthy places to go rather than targeting kids on a very small scale. Because even DeSantis said, this is a very small thing that's actually happening. So why do you need a bill like this when it's barely happening at all?
Because the second that they get this through, they can say, okay, we're going to go to 4th through 10th grade. We're going to go, then it's in every single one. They're just testing the waters.
Yes.
That's a good point. That's
exactly, I mean, that's partially what I was going to say. And also that, I mean, first of all, the parents may be in good faith wanting to protect their children, but the legislators are not.
Exactly.
And they know how to pull on the heartstrings, right? They know that they can say, don't you want to protect your children? And they don't care about that, right? You don't, like, in order to promote fascist ideology, you don't need the citizenry to all be down. You just need to manipulate them. You know, there's like, that's why there's those 13 pillars, because there's so many different ways that they do it. But I mean, I do think it's super important that we in fact think about what people might be thinking that support it, in order to, like, as you did very well, like, bring about ways that people can fight back against it and be like, yeah, that's not what you're really doing. How about we do this instead, to provide an alternative is super important. Ludin, did you raise your hand?
Yes, there is so much. So, as a gay man myself, I have to say that making it so that you can't talk about these things in school, like everybody was saying, it would make things a lot worse. For me personally, in high school, my sex education was horrible. And the only reason I actually managed to get some sort of knowledge about what sex ed was that a friend of mine convinced me to check out the LGBT Center in New York, and that's where basically I was like, wow, there's so much.
Yeah.
But so all this does is just create another Bruno for people to not want to talk about. And once you start on that route, like you were saying, Logan and Amira, you're just gonna make it so that kids are not able to express themselves and eventually commit suicide, or who knows. The sad thing is that several years ago, there was a band, I believe it was Rise Against. They had a song devoted to kids who committed suicide. I believe it was Make It Stop.
Oh, Make It Stop, Make This End. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like
great song.
Really great song. So it's like, it really sucks that people are actually pushing to make more names to add on to songs like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to move to the Earn It Act, but all of this. And also, I want to add that the same people that are saying that we shouldn't talk about, gay sexuality or different identities are the ones who have been calling their boy children like little heartbreakers and like, talking about like, oh, you got any little girlfriends? Like they have been promoting their agenda. If it's to be fair, there should be, if you don't want to discuss sexuality with children at all, I think that's weird and not healthy, but fine. But don't discuss any of it. But that's, again, it's disingenuous, right? They would
Can I just
never
add one
agree
more
to that.
thing?
Sorry?
Can I just add one more thing to this?
Please.
I think that it's kind of almost nefarious that they're using these age groups, because these age groups are when we start learning how to talk to people and to communicate, and we learn about how our brains work, kind of, like the cognitive developments and stuff. So like making sure they can't talk about certain things at this age will make sure that later on in life they will not talk about those things still.
Right.
I was just thinking about that here because I hadn't thought of that part, but I've been learning in this class I'm taking that they start learning very, very young that they can and cannot do. So if you're saying to a first grader, you can't talk about that, they will then, as a young adult, not still talk about that. And that'll lead to a lot of issues.
Yeah, no practice. Yeah. So let's move to the Earn It Act because, that is, I think, terrifying. And I don't see enough people in leftist spaces talking about it, partially because it has been sort of sidelined and marginalized as like just affecting sex workers. Again, another thing where they get people on something that they might be. Look, we have a sex negative country, and I think that's a very bad thing as a sex positive person. But the Earn It Act is another thing like Sesta Fosta, where it's essentially a Patriot Act for the internet. And the goal of the Earn It Act is essentially to end encryption and to end the things we can do and say on the internet. And the biggest one for me is the end of encryption. If there is no encryption, there is nothing that you can say or do on the internet that whoever wants to, and by whoever wants to, I mean all the letter agencies and the government itself, cannot do, cannot find, cannot get, right? That means we have no way of communicating with each other. And what does that mean? That means we can't organize. That is another suppression of labor power, right? It's a suppression of people power writ large. And let me just give you a little bit of this. To recap, here's why the Earn It Act would harm online speech, privacy, and security without achieving its child safety goal. Again, also child safety. Fear-driven censorship of legal speech. Making law enforcement investigations harder. Undermining user privacy and security. I'm going to read this part. Earn It would, as said, discourage the use of encryption, which is vital to protecting the privacy and data security of children and adults alike. Yes, children deserve privacy too. Punishing companies for strong data protection practices is an utterly mind-boggling public policy choice in the midst of an ongoing cybersecurity crisis, which has only grown worse since mid-2020. Also, privacy intrusions that will let offenders walk free. Even if you don't care about the hits to free speech and personal privacy and cybersecurity, the fact that this bill will hurt child safety efforts. By making CSAM investigations harder and making it likelier that CSAM defendants would walk free should be reason enough to oppose the Earn It Act. These are the wholly predicted consequences if Earn It, like Sesta Fosta before it, tinkers with Section 230, and Section 230 isn't the problem here anyway. Please, anyone who wants to weigh in, pop right on in.
I mean, I think one thing that I think people from various ideologies can agree on is that these tech companies have way too much data on us, right? And we see it all the time in advertising, right? When we are just happen to be looking at something at a store and then suddenly we're getting ads about it, right? And so the solution now is to attack, tech companies for giving us platforms where we have privacy, encryption. The little privacy we have now is to be like, no, you can't have anything encryption. We're going to disincentivize that, right? I mean, you think Big Brother is bad now?
Yeah, without any privacy at all, then they can be in your literal texts, like the text. I'm firing off texts all the time talking about what I want to do, or allegedly what I want to do or not do to the government. And if they could go through any of the things that we've said in or out of context and use that to bring up a case against you, that's it. That's it. We're done. We are done. Any chance we have of organizing is absolutely over. Comrade K.
Yeah. A lot of people don't understand the absolute hypocrisy in concepts like this, because we're very anti-government. None of us are denying that, because the government is, the government of the Western world is very rooted in systemic bigotry and racism and imperialism and oppression and, everything like that under the horrible capitalist sun. Now, the fact that if you express that in any way, shape, or form, that could be used against you when it's completely irrelevant to a case that, let's say in the context of the Internet Act, it's like, this guy once said that the Canadian government needs to be completely dismantled because it's rooted in white supremacy. He's anti-state, therefore he's dangerous. Let's, completely put him on house arrest, take away his kids and lock down his house and tow his car too, and peel the bumper sticker off it while we're at it. It's like, why? And what's scary is that they'll label people who are anti-government as automatically dangerous, because it's like, oh, terrorists and all that kind of stuff, because not everyone who's anti-government is great. But the government itself is horrible for all the reasons I mentioned before, and they get a free pass. It's like, why don't I just use that as merit to, again, within the context of the Internet Act, put every single MP in Parliament on lockdown to take all their kids and to, stuff like that. I know that this may not make much sense, but you cannot label everyone who's anti-government as horrible. And this act allows the government to take full advantage of that.
Yeah, they actually recently just widened, essentially, the definition of what terrorist is. If you look now, and I'm not sure if this was at the beginning of this administration or towards the end of the last, but it doesn't fucking matter to me, let's be honest. But they included left-wing extremist, right, as well as right-wing extremists, and they made sure to say that anti-government extremists are part of that. And the Internet Act would give them a mechanism for pursuing those cases widely. Does anyone else want to mention this before we move on to voter suppression? Okay, so the next thing, as in the list we had, fraudulent elections was one of the things they listed as another, stepping stone and the necessity for fascism. And I'm sure if you've heard me speak before, you know how I feel about how fraudulent our fucking elections are. We mentioned earlier that Congress and the Senate, especially the Senate, are inherently voter suppression, right? Because the Senate, the representation is completely off. There is no reasonable mind that should believe that Rhode Island should get the same number of representatives to the government as Texas. That is illogical. Unless the goal is for the vulture class to have larger say in what goes on and to override the House of Representatives, right? The Senate is there as essentially suppression of the will of the people. And I'm sure, I would love to hear arguments against it, but I don't think there are any reasonable ones or any good faith ones. But it's something I want you to think about, especially those of you who are not as radical as we are, right? The Senate, it's not the problem of who's in the Senate. The Senate is the problem. There really should only be a House of Representatives. Why do we need another body, right? And there are some arguments that, well, what about smaller states who don't have as many people? You don't have as many people. That's how it works if you're doing democracy, right? So let's bring up the recent. Now, also, I want to just mention that there have been a wave of voter suppression bills passed all across southern states. And gerrymandering has been made worse. And let me say this, not just in, red states, so-called red states, right? All of the states, whether they're controlled by the Democrats or the Republicans, have gerrymandered their states so that they have control. They draw the lines so strangely that it is completely illogical, but it locks in their power. And so both sides are guilty of this. This is not just a Republican thing, but in some of the red states, they are advancing things even further, like in Texas, where high numbers of mail ballots are, give me 1 second there. High numbers of mail ballots are being rejected in Texas under a new state law. Weeks ahead of the state's March 1st primary, local election officials in Texas are sending mail-in ballots back to thousands of voters who turned them in, citing issues with ID requirements created by the state's controversial new voting law. In Harris County, Texas's largest county, which is home to Houston, election officials say they'd received 6,548 mail-in ballots as of Saturday and had returned almost 2,500, nearly 38% of them, for correction because of an incorrect ID. That's a far higher rejection rate than is typical. Mail ballots are people's votes, so I'm very concerned, not just with the complexity of the process, but how that added complexity is going to increase the number of mail-in ballots that we have to reject. Now, why mail-in ballots are being rejected? Across the country, several states have cracked down on their vote-by-mail programs following the 2020 election. Texas, however, already had one of the most limited programs. Only voters who are over 65, disabled, out of town, or in jail are able to cast a mail-in ballot in Texas. So the big problem with this is, the problem should be relatively obvious, right? They know where the votes are coming from. They know who lives in certain areas. So what's a great way to disenfranchise voters? You say, these are the new rules for mail-in voting. Do you publish them widely? Do you put them in a place where people know what they are, can see them readily, and access them and be sure to do things right? No, you don't. Right? Or you send that information to the places that you want to vote, where the voters are going to vote the right way. And to other places, you don't tell them. But since you're putting on the books what the law is, you can say, well, it's the law. Sorry, you should have known that you have to sign your name in ancient Sanskrit, or we reject your ballot. Or they can make things so onerous and ridiculous that they can. And look, here's the other thing. When they know where the ballots are coming from, it doesn't even matter what the laws are. We have no accountability over these processes. So whether or not the person did it right, we have no way of knowing. We don't know if they did it right. And this is a more stringent form of voter suppression, right? Another way that you have of essentially destroying the will of the people. And the will of the people is not heard, right? Who has control over their primaries? The Democratic Party has much more control over their primaries than the Republicans do, right? Because look, let's keep it 1,000, right? Trump probably would not have been the nominee for the Republican Party if the Republicans had as much control over their primary process as the Democrats do. The problem is that the Democrats are there to control the left and to control people power, and to control what we have the power to access through government. So the primary process, which is only available to that party, they clamp down on. So we already have, and this is why you're never going to hear Democrats really calling this out. Because they may not like this, right? Because it means they're less likely to win nationwide elections. But once you start shining lights on what elections are and are not in this country, they're not looking for us to turn over those rocks. And like this comment says, the DNC and RNC, they are companies. There ain't nothing about them in the Constitution, right? They have said, the DNC won a case where they said, we could go and pick our nominee over cigarettes, over cigars in a back room. Because that is how that organization is set up. But this makes it worse. This is an escalation, right? And this escalation makes it even less likely that we will have access to the power that we're supposed to, which is the power to control who we have in office. I want to let anyone else who wants to step in here. Go ahead, Comrade K.
Can they just come out and say that they what they want? Can they just come out and say at this point, listen, we only want old white people in suburban neighborhoods to vote? Can they just like cut out the middleman and say that? It would make this whole thing a lot easier because they're avoiding the language that we know they want to use, which is we don't want minorities or disenfranchised people or people who've been in jail to vote. We don't want any of that stuff, but they're not using that language. So they technically aren't racist or ableist or anything like that. It's disgusting. I will say as a leftist, this kind of shit is a little conflicting for me because on one hand, I'm like, the system is so broken. All the politicians have been bought out and stuff like that. What's the point in voting? Community action, mutual aid, and independence from the government, all that kind of stuff. Hello, socialist. But the second somebody gets their voting rights touched, I will encourage you to fight like hell for it, even if I think that right to vote doesn't make much of a difference. Because if your right to vote is completely ripped away from you, what's to say your other rights are going to be left alone? Like, what's to say they're going to stop at that? It's very, very scary to me that no party is calling each other out for this because they know exactly what it entails. The Democrats can't call it out because they know that they'll get called out for it. Republicans can't call it out because they'll know they get called out for it. And the people, they're screwed either way. I wouldn't really call it the will of the people. I would call it the let's just get this over with and choose our next corporate master. We have no choice anyway, vote of the people. But I do think that even if voting doesn't make a difference in America, your right to vote must be fought for no matter what, because it is a gateway to take away the rest of your rights. First, it's your right to vote. It'll be your right to speak. It'll be your right to organize. It'll be your right to protest. That is next. Those things are already being taken away. So that's what I have to say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyone else?
Well, Democrats have been really good at, trying to virtue signal and placate to specific demographics, be it people of color, indigenous groups, the LGBTQ community. But when it comes down to it, as we've seen in the polling numbers and ultimate results from the elections, it's the white suburbanites that they're looking for. So of course they're not going to really give a shit what's happening in Texas. Yes. and voice it as a concern in general, or even for their own party, because they're still benefiting from it. Because these are people that would likely, if another Trump run happened, they would just quickly run down and try to garner up a base down in Texas of, you don't want Trump again, white suburbanites, go with us. And then they'll give them a figurehead that makes them feel a little bit better so that it's not Trump, but it's still a Republican-esque semi-Democrat candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And either way, the people lose.
Yeah.
So I want to go to the last topic we have, which is the Canadian convoy, the Freedom Convoy, I will call it. Amira, do you want to read this one?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Pull that up.
I've got it.
Okay. So the Canadian government gave itself extraordinary powers for a 30-day period to end the Freedom Convoy occupation of Ottawa by invoking the Emergencies Act. The situation was especially difficult in Ottawa, where trucks occupied the downtown core and Parliament Hill for weeks. Tensions with residents came to a breaking point after 3 weeks of incessant noise, shuttered businesses, harassment, and disruption of normal life. 2 types of emergency measures were adopted. First, the emergency measures regulations prohibit public gatherings that could lead to a breath of peace. The regulations also ban traveling to such gatherings, as well as providing any type of poverty in support of them. Second, the Emergency Economic Measures Order is aimed at starving the convoy of money and deterring people from supporting its activities. It deprived convoy participants of the ability to pay for gasoline to keep vehicles and generators running, food, hotel rooms, bouncy castles, fireworks, etc. The goal was to end the convoy's activities so that the city of Ottawa could get back to normal without any need for a violent crackdown.
Okay, so I know that you had, now we've all heard talk about there's a lot going on with that Canadian trucker convoy. And I think we can bring some excellent nuance to that. And Amira, I know that you had some some ideas that you wanted to, so I'm going to let you go ahead and lead this one.
So it wasn't necessarily ideas, but it was definitely kind of ways to look at the situation that's going on. So I found two separate articles. Let me see if I can get them up here.
Oh, no, I can. Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
And they were basically talking about how there seems to be a difference in treatment when it comes to protesters for, say, Black Lives Matter and the damage that, people would say those protests did when it came to rioting and all of the, property damage that was done during that. And that places like GoFundMe and Bitcoin didn't restrict their ability to obtain funds, but now they're doing it for the convoy for the truckers. So I thought that was kind of an interesting kind of angle to this discussion, because I do believe in, equal treatment for everyone and not being hypocritical assholes. And it seems like this is an argument, unfortunately, that I think would garner a lot of people together that would, in their support of this convoy. So go ahead.
Is this the article you were talking about? The week?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything specific you wanted to highlight from it?
Let me open my notes.
Okay.
Sorry, just one second.
Great. Yeah. So the idea is that, some people are, and this has been dividing the left for a while. Should we or should we not support the trucker convoy? Is what Canada's doing fascist or is it not, right? Is the crackdown bad? And I'm going to go ahead and say, you don't have to support either. I support no government. No government is good, especially not the Canadian or American governments. However, I also don't support the convoy because it's astroturfed. It is not the people who started the convoy. They have started many other right-wing, supposedly populist actions, right? That one of them led something called a Jericho March. If you don't know what that is, quick story. A Jericho March essentially is it's a biblical admonition, right? For people to march around and around and around a particular city until the walls fall down and you can go in and kill everyone in there. That's why they call it a Jericho March, right? And one of the groups that was part of this was doing a Jericho March. Now, do I think that it's a good idea for us to let essentially any government come in and start cracking heads on people? Absolutely not. But am I going to shed a tear about it happening to these particular people? I'm not going to. I'm not going to. And I don't think that we need to. But I think you might have a different point of view, and I'm looking forward to hearing it.
So I was actually wrong. It's the News Talk 955.com article. So I don't have a particular stance when it comes to the convoy, because I feel like I also just have a lot more that I need to learn and people's perspectives that I need to understand. But this was what was really interesting to me, because this was the one that talked about violent riots and what they called attacks on law enforcement with BLM organization, and how GoFundMe and other donations that were going to BLM continued to pour in, and that GoFundMe didn't block any of those donations, but that they're doing that with the Freedom Convoy, which has confiscated near 9 million already donated and said people needed to request a refund. So while I don't necessarily agree with this take, I think that it's one of those things where we do have to acknowledge what the other side is looking at. Where is their thinking? And they're feeling like their movements are getting thwarted, their funds are being removed from them, but it didn't happen with other protests that happened that had what they believe are serious consequences to property, to overall structure of their towns and the damages that was done there. So that was just the point there.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to pop in? Ludin, please.
All right. So my stance on this whole Freedom Convoy thing is that the whole principle of they're not wanting the vaccine mandates. That's basically where I'm coming at from this thing. Because even if 90% of the truckers are vaccinated, the fact that they're still part of the protest and are against the mandates should say more than anything else.
Comrade K.
Respectfully, fucked up. Because in Canada, there is a party that was recently formed a few years ago called the PPC, the People's Party of Canada. If you go to their homepage, you can clearly see that they are the most fascist party this country has ever known when they talk about minorities and immigrants and all that kind of stuff. You can tell exactly what kind of people they are. Now, they are growing in popularity despite the fact that they haven't won a single seat. They are some of the biggest backers of this convoy. Now, I don't care what goddamn reason you have to oppose the government. If you are in a space or a protest where even one white supremacist feels comfortable shaking hands with you, fuck you. And I genuinely mean that. And it's very dangerous because, like, I'm standing here and I listen to news reporters in Canada when they're talking about this kind of stuff, and they oppose the vaccine mandates and all that kind of stuff. We have to understand where these people are coming from. And I'm like, that's great, Jenny. So pass me that bread ration before the guard comes back and shoots us, because that's where we're going to be led to. These people are inciting fascist revolts. And the reason why they oppose the vaccine mandate is not the same reason why leftists oppose the vaccine mandate. We don't believe that people should be forced to vaccinate. These people are anti-vax conspiracy theorists who believe that if you inject your kids with the vaccine, they're going to grow into an 8-legged horned demon monster, chimpanzee, goat person. And you can hear this when the protesters talk to you. It is very much the same kind of crowd, the same kind of people that led the march on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol. It is very dangerous. I don't care what merit these protesters have if they're waving around Confederate flags in Canada.
In Canada.
In Canada, of all places. Like, who the hell do you think you are? And yes, I hate the Canadian government more than anything. And them using the Emergencies Act here and dispersing the protesters and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, I think it's the trash taking itself out, because fuck these people. But what they did was set a horrible precedent for the future, because now future prime ministers can just look back on this and just declare an emergency whenever people start protesting.
That's it.
And use the military and the police to crack down on them. And also, very quickly, these anti-vaccine mandate people are also perpetuating a lot of popular theories in their community about white genocide, thinking that the vaccine sterilizes white people. Now, I know we have to take into account why people oppose these things, but they're not coming at it from anywhere of like rationality or anything like that. They are coming at it from a place of genuine delusion and hatred for their fellow human being. And it's absolutely disgusting. These people, no.
30 seconds.
I'm very sorry for just going off on a tangent like that, but as a Canadian myself, I'm very scared of this.
Let's bring in Amira.
So I completely understand where you're coming from, Comrade K, and I know the intensity of emotions that something like this can bring. I do, at least for myself personally, I really try hard to not take movements like this that do have a myriad of support from a lot of different people with a lot of different backgrounds, and try to say that every single person that's associated with that movement is this particular way or that particular way. We have seen, when it's come to things like the flat earth situation, people get involved into these movements because that's how they're built. They're purposely orchestrated to bring people in that feel lost, that don't feel like they have a community or a home to express their views. And so they hear one thing in a group, and then more things just kind of barrel onto that. It builds and builds and builds. So I at least like to separate that. I think there's good actors within this entire thing that are just truly wanting to not have mandates and want to have a more free society. But I do think there's also extremes within the group as well. And I think we need to kind of make sure we keep that balance here.
Ludin.
A little addendum, like for example, the Boogaloo Boy group as a whole. Like there are people who are like super off the deep end, and then there are some people who are more controlled or moderate who aren't as radical in their views. So you can't just say, okay, the whole group is bad because they're all bad, and ignore the fact that there are people in there who you can actually reach out to and like have a conversation with.
Yeah.
Right. I think I'm gonna let me wrap this all up and let's get to the answers section of this. But I want to say that I hear what you're both saying, and I'm just going to throw out there that the way that fascism asserts itself is through disingenuousness, because I 100% understand people who are in good faith reasons against vaccine mandates. 100%. I don't believe in governments or countries, so like I get it. But you got to watch who's funding it and who's supporting it. And we're talking the 4 top organizers of the convoy were not truckers. And all of them have histories of doing this elsewhere. They're all big fans of people like the most dangerous person on the planet, Steve Bannon, and look that person up, watch what they are doing at all times. That is, he is very successfully creating far right-wing countries all over the globe. People think he got kicked out of America. He was done. He left because he was done here. And he went to another country and did the same thing. So here's the thing. I understand that we need to reach out to people that have different viewpoints. And I also agree that liberals are like, you're an idiot or you're a bad person if you're not vaccinated. And that's unhelpful. It's like, and they don't understand even that a lot of people who are not vaccinated aren't vaccinated because they're poor. Yeah. Because they're like, okay, I gotta maybe take a day off if I have bad reactions. I gotta have gas to get there. It's like I'm already taking my chances with life as it is, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm just gonna take my chances because I can't afford the time. I totally get that. But those people get used and then destroyed by the people who are running these things. It's not about the people who are there are plenty of people in the convoy are good people, absolutely. And I mean that literally, right? But the problem is that they are getting used. Mm-hmm. And you know who left before the cops started cracking heads? The richer people, the people who were not there for good reasons, right? They started some shit and then they saw what was happening and they're like, yeah, the cops are coming. I'll see you later. And they're off to the races. And who loses? The people lose, right? Yeah. So there's a saying, if you have a table with 12 people and there's one Nazi, you have a table of 12 Nazis. And that's because there are certain ideas that have to be opposed out of hand to protect the very nature of being able to have discourse. Andrew.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think in some ways this whole convoy thing reminds me of the whole Tea Party uprisings, right? Which I think the same can be argued, right? Yes. The people who were involved in the Tea Party uprisings, not all of them were terrible people. They were reacting to legitimate things that were frustrating, right? The economy was doing terrible. People were losing their homes. I mean, of course, people are going to be anxious about that. But then look who actually funded these. These weren't grassroots protests. These were funded by the Koch brothers. And the people were being used, and they were using their frustrations to be like, okay, the solution is to privatize everything, right? The solution is to make this even more of a capitalist society, right? And so I think that is always the thing when thinking about the end goal with these things. It's not talking about necessarily the individual people, right? But what is the goal and what are the people who are funding this, who are non-truck drivers, actually want as well. So,
and I want to highlight, to wrap this section up, I want to highlight this comment because that's it. Here's the thing. If you want to argue against fascist state actions, like the use of the emergency powers that Canada did, you should have been doing that when they were cracking heads on the Wet'suwet'en people, which they have been doing For First Nations people in Canada have been catching it, right? Here, Standing Rock, under the black president, right? Dogs were getting sicked on people. And these people who are for freedom and against state overreach, crickets. Nothing. Because it's not really about state overreach. Mm-hmm. They only care about state overreach what's reaching into their neighborhoods and into their pockets and into their power. Because it's not that they're against state power. They're against state power when it challenges them. And the reason that so many people, and listen, I get that we want to unify like the so-called left and the so-called right in areas where it's important, but we got to understand when we're just being used. What we need to do is we need to inform and appeal to the people and tell them when they're getting used and how, and tell them to support these other things because eventually you're going to catch it. Anything you allow to happen to people that live under the same laws as you will happen to you eventually whenever they see fit. And to me, I do think, and I like that, both you, Ludin, and you, Amira, like kind of tamp me down a little bit in the way that I think about some of these things, because it is important to remember that there's a lot of people in those convoys that were there for good reasons, that are not racist, and that could be allies if we had something there for them to follow. And that is what we're going to get to next, which is how do we prevent this rise of fascism? What do we do in the face of it when we don't have access to the ballot box? When the politicians clearly don't listen to us, right? When the Democrats and the Republicans, no matter who you vote for, the bombs keep falling. So I think the answer is people power. That's it. And what do I mean by people power? I mean mutual aid. I mean divestment from these systems, right? I mean doing real stuff, reclaiming our communities. And I'm talking about from the rural areas to the suburban areas to the city areas. Reclaim your soil. Start at the grassroots, and I mean that literally, right? Suburbs, you should not need malls. You have enough land that you could be growing your own food and feeding your own people. That is the reason that they have those laws for HOAs, is so that you don't do that. And then they keep you in these cloistered communities where you don't have access to other types of people and barely any access to each other. So it's easy to feed you lies and get you revved up against the BLM terrorists, right? Because they're dependent on the state. And so what we do need to do and how we do need to unify is to make sure that people know how to access mutual aid and how to start doing mutual aid, to understand dual power, to understand that we need to be building power that runs concurrent to the state, because we can't just let the state fall and expect things to go in a good direction. We need to have options available for people when they see that there is no political answer for them. And I think that's where we're failing. The reason that people went to the Tea Party and that people went to the convoy is because there is no strong left. There's no Black Panther Party who are like, look, you don't need to go with those fascists. We're going to get you some food. Okay? We're going to make sure your kids have medicine, have schooling, somebody to look after them when you go to work, right? And we're going to tell you about what this government is really doing to people. I want to get your thoughts on ways that you think we can help to energize people and how we can get out of this situation before, not before it, because there's no luck for that, but as it worsens. Comrade K.
Well, quickly, isn't that how America was founded? A bunch of people got really pissed off at the British for not governing the American colonies correctly, and they were treated them like shit. And the founding fathers were like, hey, let's fund this. I bet this will be a nice little passion project. And then America was born. My personal way of fighting fascism, other than, the physical way when they actually show up at your front door, is we need a revolutionary party or parties. We need people on the ground who can offer alternatives, good left-wing alternatives to fascistic rhetoric and state rhetoric. We need people like the Black Panthers. We need revolutionaries. We don't need liberals. We don't need surface level activism that says fight hate with love and all that kind of stuff. Why can't we all get along? No, we need actual educated revolutionary parties. In my country in particular, we are very much in need of one. We have an organization called Fight Back, which I'll talk about later this week, which is a newspaper that helps students and workers unionize and radicalize and discuss Marxist and socialist theory and stuff like that. And they teach about groups like the Black Panthers and such. They're small, but they're growing in size very fast. America needs organizations that are very similar to that, or it needs to revitalize those existing institutions already, because that alternative is the opposition. You are not only providing people with an alternative, you are strengthening the front against fascism. So yes, revolutionary parties, theory, history, providing people with mutual aid, food, independence from the government, weapons training, whatever you can do to make sure that communities can stand on their own 2 feet without the fascist state, do it. Revolutionary Party, that's my answer.
Anyone else? Okay.
Right now, there is an organization or like organizing of a general strike for May 1st that you can actually find out more about at generalstrikerevolution.com. And they have a whole list of demands, and what the idea is to not shop and not work May 1st until the demands are met. And I think striking is one of the big ways like normal people can actually make a big difference in the bigger picture, because without us as workers, the ruling class can't get their money. And we are very important to how everything works here, and we don't need to be taken advantage of like we have been.
Hell yeah. Absolutely. I will underline that 2 times. Andrew, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll just say real quick. I mean, I think, even just as a first step, right? Not the final, but a first step. Look at all the different labor strikes that are happening right now. Look at how Starbucks, even all throughout the country, one by one, is starting to unionize. Starbucks previously was like very far from being unionized, right? So I think even, I think it oftentimes can be mind-boggling and overwhelming to think, how do we get to so much, how do we get to where we're all self-sufficient growing our own food, right? Because that does take time, right? I'm not saying it's impossible, but it takes time. So I think sometimes it's helpful to be like, okay, first step, more people are unionizing, getting more pay. How can we all band together to enable that to happen, right? We're not relying on electoral politics for that, right? Politicians are not doing anything, right? They'll give some lip service, but there's really no policies that are going to be passed for that, right? So taking matters into your own hands to give everyone else more of a quality living, right? Cost of, and then from there, people will have a little bit more time to think about what else they can do because they're being exploited less, right? So that's, I think, one thing just to consider.
Yeah. We're going to need to wrap up soon, but I just want to say that there's also something called the Mutual Aid Landing Zone, and it is on Discord. And what it is a way to get connected with other people. And it's also separated by area, by state, and even more locally. And that's a good way for you if you think that you want to get involved in mutual aid activities, which I think that's the most important thing, because things are already really bad. And these answers are needed direly. I don't personally believe that we can wait for parties to do all the work for us. I think this is an all hands on deck, everyone kind of situation. So it needs to start in your own backyard. And if you have some money, if you have a job that pays you a lot, kick some of that money on the regular to local mutual aid groups, to community fridges, et cetera, right? We have to start now. We have to start today. And please, make sure that if you are a person who has access to people who believe in electoral politics and are skeptical of, radical politics, please get them to redistribute those funds and get them to understand that, look, this is coming to their doorstep too. We all need each other. The biggest thing we need is unity, and not just in America. I'm talking global solidarity, because as threats of war ramp up, none of the leaders of our countries care about us. People are making this Biden, Putin thing like Russia versus... No. This is the global vulture class deciding who is going to die for its gains. We cannot play those games anymore. We need to remove ourselves. If you can join the May Day strike, definitely, like Felice said, get plugged into that. Because what we need to do, the only answer to this, is for us to use power and to not be afraid of the people using our power, right? And we need to do that in the form of our labor and our money. Those are the only things that capitalism cares about. That's it. And in so doing, we will be building the structures that we need to take us into the future. I want to give everyone 30 seconds to say where, what's going on for them and where people can find you. Let's start with Comrade K.
Hello. You can follow me on Twitter and on TikTok with that exact same name. And you can find me on Twitter with that handle. And on TikTok, you can find me with that handle, but there's one less D. Joke. I make regular political content just like this, especially on TikTok, and on Twitter, I discuss it a little bit more. I have a show every single Saturday at 6 o'clock, and this week I'm going to have a very, very special guest I'm very excited for, so please tune in Saturday, 6 o'clock on the Populist Voice Network, either on Twitter or on YouTube.
Excellent. Thank you. And Felice.
Hi, I am a researcher on PVN, and you can find me here and on Twitter. And I just kind of make commentary about politics and general's goings on and complain about my life. So that's about it.
As well you should. Ludin.
Well, well, you can find me on Twitter. I'm also trying to start back up on Twitch with video game streaming. Same username. And yes, I will also be appearing on a special show tomorrow with Andrew and our resident reader.
Excellent.
Z. such a build-up.
Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, so you can find me. So Mondays at 9:30, me and our lead Logan have postmortem breakdown 9:30 on Joy's channel, and then you can find me on panels here. Yeah, tomorrow we're gonna be doing a special episode with Ludin and Z, and then at some point I'll be doing. I think I'll be doing starting a show of some sort, but we'll get there later. But yes, on the Populist Voice. But yes, cool.
And Amira.
You can find me at the Twitter links below. You can also find me on my YouTube page, which is Endemic Times, and my blog, which is endemictimes.com, or also on Substack. And I do every other week panels here on PVN.
Excellent. And you can find me at Focused on Infinity on Instagram and on TikTok, and at Logan Grendel on Twitter. And I am very, very grateful to everyone in this panel for having this discussion, and everyone who commented. Even some of you were a little iffy. But I want to thank you all for being part of this. And more importantly, political action is not about the ballot box. We are basically out of time, and we need to start acting like we know that. The water is rising, fascism is rising, and what we need right now is love and people power. And if someone is not acting out of love, they are not part of our movement, because that's what we need right now. So I hope that all of you will continue to follow us and come back next time. And until then, we'll see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.